Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about 10 of the greatest zombie movies of all time.
Everybody they kill gets up and kills.
Residents are advised to find a safe place and stay there.
So I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting pretty sick and tired of the zombie subgenre. However, while making this list, I realized it's not so much that I'm sick and tired of zombie movies, I'm just sick and tired of subpar zombie movies. Because while making this list, I realized that these 10 movies are some of my favorite horror movies, period, regardless of the subgenre. So with that, let's get to the list! The Return of the Living Dead is a 1985 comedy horror movie. Written and directed by Dan O'Banion, it stars Tom Matthews, James Karen, and Linnea Quigley. When two employees of a medical supply warehouse accidentally release a deadly gas into the air, the vapors cause the dead to rise again as zombies.
Who's there?
What an absolutely bonkers, silly, yet absolutely fun movie this is. This really sums up the 80s so much for me. Just the fashion, the style, the pacing, the type of humor, the practical effects, just everything about this movie very much feels like what I love so much about 80s comedy / horror. Because the zombies in this are as funny but also as great looking as any horror movie from that era. Just the practical effects that are done on them, the different unique zombies, and then the characters in general in this movie. Everybody has got this different style about them and they're so fun to watch. I mean, this has Tarman as well as Linnea Quigley getting naked in the rain in a cemetery. I mean, what more can you ask for from a great 80s movie? This movie is so much fun, and it definitely is one of my favorites of all time. Zombie is a 1979 Italian zombie horror movie, directed by Lucio Fulci and serves as a sequel to George A. Romero's 1978 film Dawn of the Dead. It stars Tisa Farrow, Ian McCulloch, and Richard Johnson. A New York reporter follows a woman to an island where a doctor faces an epidemic of the undead. So I just rewatched this movie while making this list because it had been at least 20 years since I watched this, and I was really surprised just how unique and creative this movie is, because it has some of the most wild scenes of any horror movie you'll ever see. Everything from a zombie fighting a shark on the bottom of the ocean to a woman whose face is being shoved into a piece of wood that goes straight into her eye, and it doesn't cut away from it at all. It shows you every bit of gore and grime and nastiness that you could possibly expect. But beyond that, it's not just a movie that's about those scenes. It's a movie that actually has a really well done story, and it's really creative and enjoyable to watch. Now, I don't know if I would say it connects perfectly with Dawn of the Dead, but as far as a spiritual sequel goes, just kind of taking one chapter out of that whole story, I think it does actually work really well. It really has a lot of that 70s charm to it, and just the style and way that it's shot is very enjoyable as well. And even though this isn't a giallo movie, it definitely still has some of that Italian charm that was really present in that era of horror. This is a brilliant movie and definitely a staple for any fan of zombie movies.
Mr. West.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
It will scare you to pieces.
Re-Animator is a 1985 horror comedy, loosely based on the 1922 H.P. Lovecraft novelette. It's directed by Stuart Gordon and stars Jeffrey Combs, Bruce Abbott, and Barbara Crampton. After an odd new medical student arrives on campus, he gets his roommate involved in bizarre experiments centering around the reanimation of the dead.
The brain?
Of course.
He's dead.
Twice.
This is another one of my absolute favorite 1980s movies. It's funny and quirky with a really strange, dark sense of humor, and Jeffrey Combs is just an absolute riot. He's such a character, just so quirky and fun in this. But there's so many scenes in this movie that force you to have a really sick, twisted sense of humor. It's colorful and weird, with tons and tons of 80s charm. And the pseudoscience in this is absolutely great. This is an absolute classic and a definite must for any fan of horror. "28 Days Later" is a 2002 British post-apocalyptic horror movie. Directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. It stars Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, and Brendan Gleeson. 4 weeks after a mysterious, incurable virus spreads across the UK, a handful of survivors try to find sanctuary. Hello? Hello? I'll never forget how blown away I was by this movie. I went and saw it in theaters. I was still pretty young and I hadn't seen a ton of horror movies yet. But even for people that had, this movie came at you with this ferocity that nothing to this point had ever done before. Because it's just so vicious, and the speed at which this movie comes at you with. We just had never seen any kind of zombie kind of creatures ever done like this. And I know a lot of people will argue that these are not zombies because they're not dead, they're not the undead. I get all that, but to me that's kind of semantics. They are mindless. They are coming at you and attacking with one idea in mind. They're not something you can reason with. They might as well be dead. But regardless of which side of the argument you fall on when it comes to this movie, I think everybody can agree that this movie is just absolutely badass. It's just so brutal and bleak, and it's shot with this real grainy style that just gives it even more of this feeling like you're watching something that could really happen. And this movie was absolutely a game changer because zombies have never been the same again. And even if you want to say these are not zombies, the zombies that we have gotten since then were affected more by these, whatever you want to call them, these sick or whatever. They were more affected by them than they were by the past and the George A. Romero type of zombie. These are definitely what we have seen much more of ever since. And the sequel to this was really well done as well. I've always hoped that they would make a third. There's been talks for years about that happening, but as of yet, we've never seen it. Either way though, I'm a huge fan of this movie and definitely had to put it on this list.
Braindead.
Braindead is a 1992 New Zealand comedy horror movie. Written and directed by Peter Jackson, it stars Tim Baum, Diana Penoliver, and Elizabeth Moody. A young man's mother is bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey and gets sick and dies, but comes back to life and begins killing and eating his friends and neighbors. Oh my god, this movie is so much fun. I hadn't seen it since my late teens, so a long time ago, okay? And I rewatched it just to make this list because I wanted to really be clear on if this movie deserved on this list and why it did, because I just remembered having fun with it, but I'm like, I was a teenager. Of course I had fun with it. It was gory, you know? But I wanted to see if this movie was more than that because so many people consider it one of the greatest. And I wanted to know why, like firsthand, so I can talk about it. I wanted to really have a clear picture on why. And it so much deserves on this list because nothing to this date has ever done anything more wild and crazy with practical effects and with such a low budget. It still just absolutely blows my mind. I don't know how they pulled off a lot of these special effects and things because To this point, you had definitely never seen anything do what they did in this. Because gory isn't the word for it. Because slimy and gooey and goopy and gross is not the word for it. This is a whole different level of all of that. And yet it's silly, and yes, it has a dark sense of humor, so it's not something that everybody's gonna find funny. But if you're a fan of horror, more than likely you have a twisted sense of humor like I do, and you'll definitely have a blast with this. It's just zany, with one crazy stunt after another, and it never stops, because it takes a little bit to get going, maybe 15 minutes. But then once it's going, it's literally just non-stop. It never stops coming at you with these wild things that just has your mouth wide open going, how were they doing this? How did they pull that off? I've seen practical effects done, and I've seen this and that, and just without having this enormous budget, it's just wild that they were able to do this. Because we see movies now with special effects and CGI and huge budgets, and even they don't pull off stuff as crazy as this. But it's all done in this tongue-in-cheek way that is very much meant to just be fun and to go along with the ride with. It's not meant to be scary. It's not meant to really disturb you on any level. It's just simply for the people like me that just get a kick out of this kind of film. And you can definitely see in watching this why Peter Jackson was able to have so much success in making movies, especially Lord of the Rings. All I can say is that I wish Peter Jackson had stuck with horror, because God knows what he would have come up with. I hope someday Peter Jackson does one more for the road.
Oi!
Shaun.
Oh.
Shaun of the Dead is a 2004 zombie horror comedy. Directed by Edgar Wright and written by Wright and Simon Pegg. It stars Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, and Kate Ashfield. The uneventful, aimless life of a London salesman and his layabout roommate are disrupted by a zombie apocalypse.
Nice, good vocal work. Let's all try it together, shall we? 1, 2...
So in my opinion, this is the greatest blend of horror and comedy that we've ever seen. Because this is really a well done zombie horror movie. But on top of that, it legitimately is a comedy as well. The comedy is smart and well timed and paced, and it comes at you with this very unique brand of humor. Because you have to pay attention to it. It does have some silliness, don't get me wrong, but the timing between Simon Pegg and Nick Frost is just impeccable. You can tell that these guys are real friends, because their banter, that's the best part of the movie. Just their little back and forth moments that catch you off guard are just brilliant. But on the horror side, it gets gory, and it definitely feels like a throwback to a Romero film. You can really feel the rotting flesh of the undead. They're just sick and twisted. You can really tell that the people involved were big fans of horror. They weren't just playing around with the horror as like a vehicle to deliver their comedy. No, this was meant to be a horror movie, but also very funny. And because of that, it's actually an incredible movie, and I don't think always gets quite the credit it deserves as far as the horror element. And as beloved as this movie is in the horror community, sometimes I wonder if it is given enough credit as far as the zombie side and how well that part of this movie is executed. It was also really refreshing and unique, because when this movie came out, the zombie thing was not happening. You were not seeing all these different things in zombies. It was pretty much a dead subgenre. And in a lot of ways, this movie deserves a lot of that credit for helping to bring the zombie as this big thing into our media. This film is one hell of a ride, and definitely one of the best ever done. Train to Busan is a 2016 South Korean action horror movie. Directed by Yin Sing-ho, it stars Gang Yu, Ma Dong-suk, and Kim Soo-won. While the zombie virus breaks out in South Korea, passengers struggle to survive on a train from Seoul to Busan. When this movie came out, it absolutely blew me away, because I thought at the time, like I kind of feel like now, I had seen all there was that could be done in this genre, because there was just so much zombie stuff being made. I had just grown so tired of this subgenre. It just seemed like it was everywhere and being shoved down our throats. And so when I started hearing buzz and people talking about this movie, I was like, yeah. But the more I heard it and the louder it got, the more interested I became. And so finally I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna check this out. And wow, because this movie comes at you with a 28 days later kind of speed and ferocity, right? But then it also has this wild, over the top level of just bodies everywhere, becoming chaos and just overwhelming you. On top of that, they threw a lot of really unique elements, scenes of things that I just hadn't seen done before, at least not in that type of scenario. And the fact that it's these closed quarters on a train, it just becomes absolutely terrifying. And the director and the way that it's shot, everything makes it feel overwhelming and just like you can't breathe. So claustrophobic and just terrifying. And what really surprised me about it, and what makes me think it's gonna have lasting power, is its heart. This movie will have you in tears by the end. It pulls at the heartstrings, and yet it also has scenes where you're cheering. Just the rise and fall of emotions that this movie threads throughout is just really well done, and like very few action horror movies, especially in the zombie genre, but just in general that you'll see. This is an absolutely special movie, and definitely one of the greatest zombie movies ever made. Dawn of the Dead is a 2004 action horror movie, directed by Zack Snyder with a screenplay by James Gunn. It's a remake of George A. Romero's 1978 classic of the same name, and stars Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, and Jake Weber. A group of survivors from a zombie outbreak take refuge in a large shopping mall. So I'd say for the most part, I'm not really a huge fan of remakes. Very, very few ever do anything to add to what was already done with the original, much less very few of them are even worth watching in general. Because to me, you don't always have to one-up the original, but I prefer if you do something new. But no matter what, you need to do something with it. You can't just simply copy and paste and slap some brand new effects and whatever on it. And we see that done so much. But in this case, I'd argue this is one of the very best remakes we've ever seen. Because I don't even think of this as a remake. I have to remind myself sometimes that, hey, this was really done before. This is George A. Romero's movie. They're just doing something different. Because it feels like a very different movie, even though it's telling basically the same story. And honestly, I don't think as far as modern zombies, we've ever seen anybody do it better. Yes, you can argue that other movies in the past were done better and this and that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about as far as movies from the last 20 years. That type of zombie where they're faster and they're more brutal and we just have the new rules, you know, like the newer modern take on zombies. I don't think there's been anybody that has done it better than this movie, because the speed at which it comes at you, the way the zombies feel, they actually feel threatening. And I'll tell you this right now, the cold open, the first, 5 minutes or so of this movie is some of the most terrifying, heart-pounding, intense scenes of any movie I've ever seen. It is just that well done, that in your face, and that savage. And this movie does a fantastic job of giving you characters that you really care about. Everybody has their own unique style to them. They all feel like real people with each individual personalities, but yet they're all interesting and likable in one way or another. And I really appreciated the fact that they have all these people from different walks of life that are forced into this scenario. And it just is kind of this microcosm of what we see in the real world and how we're all forced to get along and forced to try to work our differences out for the greater good. In this case, trying to survive because of a bunch of brain eaters right outside your window, so to speak. But the way this movie is shot, the style, the special effects, the acting, everything about this movie is really right up there with as good as we've ever seen. And this may be controversial, I don't know, especially putting it this high on a list, but just my own personal take, my own personal views and opinion here. I think this is an absolute treasure, and a movie that I think as time goes by will slowly get higher and higher and higher on the list of greatest horror movies, especially for the zombie subgenre.
Night of the Living Dead.
Night of the Living Dead is a 1968 indie horror movie. Created by George A. Romero with a screenplay by John A. Russo. It stars Dwayne Jones, Judith O'Dea, and Carl Hardman. The story follows 7 people who are trapped inside of a rural farmhouse, which is being attacked by a horde of the undead.
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
They're coming for you, Barbara.
So this is where it all began. This is the daddy of all zombie movies. It is really amazing to me how unique and different and original this movie was, especially for the time. Because yes, you had zombies of some form and White Zombie and different old classic movies, but nothing like this. There was no undead, not on the level that we see in this. These were ghouls, these were undead. They were very, very different than the zombies that we had seen from the, Haitian stories from the old classics. And so in so many ways, this was unique. It was George A. Romero kind of taking different ideas and fusing it all together to make this unique blend of horror. And for the time, this movie was incredibly savage. The scene with the little girl eating her mom, I mean, people were like freaking out, like running outside, throwing up in the in-between rows in the theater, like crying, screaming, like literally just losing their minds because they had never seen anything remotely like this to this point. On top of all that, the different social things that this movie was saying, even though supposedly George A. Romero was not intentionally trying to cast a black man in the lead role and trying to make any statements, he was just picking the best actor. It doesn't change the fact that what came from this movie. It was very groundbreaking and it caused a lot of people to freak out, but it was also a really impactful statement for the time. And unfortunately, for the people involved's pocketbooks, they didn't make almost any money whatsoever from this movie because there was a goof up when they were filing for the copyright claim on this movie, and it ended up being free domain. It was public domain, and so that's why you've seen this movie in little bits and pieces in every horror movie imaginable. It's always in the background, a TV playing a movie. It's always this movie. Because it wasn't until just really recently that the copyright holder was actually people involved with making this movie. But because of that, it was also seen by a ton more people. No matter what, you could argue that this is the most impactful horror movie that we've ever seen. It's at least right up there because it's inspired so many different creative people, especially in film, but even outside of film, just in art in general, it's been a very inspirational movie. And it most definitely is on that Mount Rushmore for zombie horror movies. There's only one more that I put above it, but you'll see why in a second. But yeah, this movie is incredible and definitely one of the best all time.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
We are down to the line, folks. We are down to the line.
Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead is a 1978 zombie horror movie, written, directed, and edited by George A. Romero. It stars Ken Foray, David M.G., and Galen Ross. During an escalating zombie epidemic, a group of survivors seek refuge in a deserted shopping mall.
What the hell is it?
Looks like a shopping center, one of those big indoor malls.
What are they doing? Why do they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory.
So this is, in my opinion, the absolute greatest zombie movie ever made. I feel like it gets everything right. And as much as I love every single other movie on this list, this is where George A. Romero, in my opinion, perfected the craft. The special effects, the mood, the atmosphere, the acting, the way it's shot, the pacing of it, the absolute style, everything about this movie, the story that it's trying to tell. There's amazing character arcs and just interesting style throughout. I recently went and saw it in a theater, and because of when it came out, I had never been able to see it in a theater. And so it was just amazing to get to see it on the big screen. It was in 3D, which I can't see because you gotta have two eyes. But still, it was very cool to just put the glasses on and just to feel that vibe from it. And all these years later, it still holds up so well. And Savini's special effects are on full display. He has got some of the most creative, unique ways to pull off gore in this movie. Things that were just so pioneering. Nobody had ever even thought to do some of the stuff that he pulls off in this movie, and it's just so cool. Even if there is this weird blue tint to the zombies, that just adds to the charm. And he does talk about the blood being the worst thing, the biggest mistake of his career. Once again, I still think that adds to the charm. It just makes this movie feel of its age. I think it's an absolute classic, and in my humble opinion, the greatest zombie movie ever made. So that's my list, but I'm not done with zombies yet. I definitely want to come back and do some more videos in this subgenre because it was really fun to spend some time in here and watch some movies I hadn't seen in a long time, and just watch a few that I didn't talk about, but were my first time watches that I did still enjoy. They just simply weren't, in this top 10 level. But no matter what, I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear what your favorite zombie movies are and why. And what are the movies I need to watch? What are those zombie movies that nobody talks about? Because that's the stuff I'm looking for. That gold that nobody knows about. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ding that little bell, because that's the best way to keep track of this channel. And when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every single week, I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to find out how you can become a part of the Ghost Pirate crew on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. And if you want to find out how you can become a channel member, there's a little button right down there that says join. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. If you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me rank my 10 favorite slasher movies. And I'll see you guys next time.